Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alistair.
And I'm Nick.
And in today's episode, we're doing an X-Men special, in that reviewing the third series of Legion and the new run of X-Men comics, House of X and Powers of 10, by Jonathan Hickman, Pepe Larraz, and R.B. Silver. But before we dive into that, Nick, what have you been up to since we last spoke?
Well, to keep with the Marvel theme, and also because consuming all this X-Men material hasn't left me that much time to watch other things, I have also been watching the 6th season of Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., the show which, as ever, I am relatively confident I'm the only person in Britain still watching. This is, of course, the first Marvel TV spin-off about, well, they're still technically Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., but now there's about 7 of them, and they work in a tiny base under a disused lighthouse and fight against increasingly bizarre sci-fi threats. This year it was an interdimensional demon that happens to look exactly like Agent Coulson, and a race of slightly generic robotic sci-fi things called the Chronicons. But still, it remains, as I always say about Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., kind of good schlocky fun. Yeah, this is season 6. I'm pretty sure they thought they were going to get cancelled at the end of season 5, and then they did a sort of ending, and then they were renewed for 2 more seasons to bring them up to seven, which seems to be some sort of TV magic number. And so yeah, they've now got these 2 seasons left, and they've got to write around the fact that at the end of season 5 they sort of killed off Agent Coulson, who is obviously kind of the main character. They've done the move where Agent Coulson comes back, well, where Clark Gregg, the actor, comes back playing a different character, and everyone has to sort of react to it. And it's very tropey, it's very TV sci-fi, but it's having a lot of fun with it, and it knows the characters quite well at this stage and can dig into their emotions and stuff quite easily. So yeah, it's still, at long last, after about 3 slightly weak seasons, quite good, reliable viewing.
Yeah, because we've talked before on this show about the fact that you're continuing to watch Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and I think you kind of expressed the view that it started quite well, or at least all right, then had a dip in quality, which is probably the time most people stopped watching, and then kind of had a later resurgence. So is it Series 6 part of this later return to quality?
Yeah, I think so. It's not quite as good as the golden age of Season 4, which I think was probably when it really, really got good. But Season 5 and Season 6 have sort of kept up this reasonably good run of fun, silly, constant switching between different genres and stuff. Well, not genres, more sort of tropey things for them to shoot at. But yeah, since Season 4 they've been going a bit more off the wall with it in terms of what they bring in, rather than sticking to this sort of militaristic hunt down the mutants angle, which was kind of where they were in season 1. Whereas from season 4, it's been very much, oh look, it's demons, oh look, we're in space, oh look, we're in the future, oh look, we're in space and in the future. Seasons 1 to 3 had their moments, mostly towards the end of season 1, when S.H.I.E.L.D. was turned out to be Hydra as part of Winter Soldier, and they did some quite good things with that in the TV show. Yeah, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. finding out that S.H.I.E.L.D. was evil was a good moment. I think the twist I can now safely spoil, where one of the main cast turns out to also be Hydra, which was all pretty well handled, but it did then slump a bit into a really, really boring Inhuman storyline in seasons 2 and 3, part of Marvel's now quite well documented failed attempt to make the Inhumans happen, which started badly with the bad Inhuman storyline in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and then finished even worse with the famously divided Marvel Inhumans show, which even I, Captain Watches the Marvel, has not watched.
Yeah, and obviously they killed Agent Coulson once before as well in the film, and then brought him back, so I guess he's got form for them killing him off and bringing him back.
Yeah, well, they haven't yet brought him back, undone his death. They've just come up with a couple of excuses for Clark Gregg to keep being in it. I mean, we're a bit past that at this stage. When it originally started, I think Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was very much the Coulson show, I suppose. The show where the central mystery was Coulson is back. But how? Etc.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, although at this point, thanks to the fact that in the Marvel TV and film don't seem to really talk anymore, I'm pretty sure in the film continuity, Coulson's probably just dead. You know, we're in some sort of alternate reality in the TV shows now.
Well, we got to see him again for Captain Marvel, which was nice, but that was obviously set in the past.
Yeah, I will be somewhat surprised if we see a present-day Coulson acknowledgement in the films. I think they're a bit past that at this point. But yeah, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., it's a silly thing to do in the recommendation segment because it's quite a limited spec recommendation. If you happen to stop watching Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. somewhere in like season 2 or 3, maybe consider picking it back up with season 4. It gets a bit better. If you're outside that quite small remit, then just ignore me, man. I'm not saying anything that's any use to you.
Well, it's good to know that it's carrying on and it's not just descended into like the pits of terribleness.
Yeah, it is finishing at the end of season 7. The end is pretty nigh. Like, at the end of season 6 did come with a very big honking, we know we're continuing cliffhanger moment. So yeah, they've been brought back for 2 more final years.
Cool.
So yeah, we'll get another one of these in about a year, and then Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. will be over, but it's okay, because we're recording this the morning after the big Disney Plus presentation, and the one thing we do not lack is Marvel TV.
No, I think that the fact that one of our specialisms seems to be reviewing Marvel TV shows, we've got plenty of content to look forward to.
Well, now we've done Legion and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., there are going to be at least a few months of my life, I think, where I'm not watching any live-action Marvel adaptations. It's going to be interesting to see what that's like.
And there's no Marvel films till next year.
Well, exactly. I think a possible Runaways might come back between now and Christmas, but if not, I might be devoid of Marvel adaptations till 2020. Jesus Christ.
What will we do with our time?
Tune in next episode to find out. But first, there'll be about another 40 minutes of Marvel coverage on this podcast. But before all that, Alistair, what else have you got to recommend?
Well, I went to see, I guess what's probably going to be the biggest independent film of the year, unless there's like a big surprise, probably around Christmas time or something like that. But anyway, I went to see the 9th film from Quentin Tarantino, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And it's certainly worth watching. There's lots to dig into there. I saw it last night before we recorded. It's one of those films I think you need to sit with a while to really get a handle on how you feel about it, maybe even preferably watch it twice. My opinions are quite fresh. I mean, there's lots to like about it. It's a really rich evocation of the late 1960s and that sort of Hollywood golden age. Yeah, so it's sort of set in Hollywood at the end of the studio system and their sort of decline and the rise of new mediums like television, and at a point when pop culture is changing and sort of youth culture is emerging in a big way with like sort of hippie movements and the kind of psychedelic music that's being played. So yeah, there's a really rich evocation of the period. Leonardo DiCaprio playing a sort of TV and film star who's slowly realizing that he's a has-been. I know he's very good. Tarantino, I think, is like famously undisciplined. I'm certainly of the opinion that it could have done with a tighter edit, maybe about 20 minutes or so could have been taken out. There's probably like a shorter, zippier film in there. Yeah, and also there's a kind of way that he sort of weaves this fictional story of, this character that he's created, Rick Dalton, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, and Cliff Booth, his best friend stroke stunt double, played by Brad Pitt. And he kind of weaves this fictional story in with the real life story of the Manson family and Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski, which is kind of odd. I don't want to spoil too much about the film, but there is a very strange sort of blending of fact and fiction. But yeah, which I'm not really sure how I feel about. It does some interesting things, so it's certainly worth watching and worth thinking about. And it's got lots of good bits in it. So yeah, I don't know, maybe stay tuned for more opinions some other time.
Yeah, I saw this film with Alistair. I quite enjoyed it. I know nothing about the history, but it felt possibly a bit surprising from Quentin Tarantino, but it felt quite ponderous literary novel, to be honest. Like, the previous films of his I've seen have been quite rooted in their genre and quite, prone to throwing in an action set piece quite often. Well, maybe set piece is a bit too commercial a word for Tarantino, but yeah, throw in a bit of action, a bit of high spectacle, or really aggressively staged artificial quippy banter. And although there is definitely some staged artificial banter in this film, it's not quite as pervasive, I don't think. It feels quite a subdued film. Yeah, I don't know, I quite enjoyed it in a sort of very slow, ponderous way. I didn't entirely know the history behind it, although I was able to guess it just from watching the film. It's kind of become a bit of a Tarantino signature move at this point, hasn't it? The slight sort of heroic rewriting of history.
Yeah.
Over his last 3 films, he seems to have really got into that.
Yeah, I think, from Inglourious Basterds onwards, he's kind of, been rewriting American history. Well, his early films are sort of kind of straight up crime films. He was a pulp guy, sort of. I did like pulp films, but with kind of an arty or interesting twist on them. And then more recent films have been more about exploring the kind of foundational myths of America. So he's done World War II. He's done slavery. He's done sort of the westward expansion, and now he's doing 1950s Hollywood, 1950s, 1960s Hollywood. And yeah, like I say, he's not just doing films set in these periods, he's constantly like reinterpreting them, like Django being a film about slavery with a hip-hop soundtrack. It's not aiming at historical accuracy the way that, I don't know, 12 Years a Slave is. And obviously Inglourious Basterds is just a really broad rewriting of history. But yeah, because I guess there's a story he wants to tell that doesn't quite link up with history. And maybe he's trying to say something about how America views itself is not how history was.
I mean, the ending of this film, again, I too am trying to skate over the spoilers because I don't see much point in spoiling the whole film in this like 5-minute mini review. But the alternate history stuff that happens is played in quite a dreamy fairy tale like. It goes from being quite slow and literary into this sort of, we're in a movie now, things are quite big and broad, and a lot more things are being played for laughs, and a lot more happy endings are being had, and it feels very not real. You can sort of feel the film wishing it had gone this way. It's a slightly more sort of wistful, happy rewriting of history, rather than Inglourious Bastards, fuck yeah, let's kill Hitler, or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Which is... It is interesting. It's quite, in its own way, reframing it like that means that even though it's the happy version of the history, it's still kind of sad. It's weird.
Yeah, it is very odd. I think what you said, how it's like more like a ponderous literary novel than a lot of Tarantino films, is quite an apt description. One of his previous films, I think this is most similar to, is probably Jackie Brown, in that it's quite quiet compared to a Tarantino film, which is obviously known for being like bombastic. The dialogue is, although good, there's not too much of the kind of Tarantino turning up to 11 dialogue, which is, it's good to have some more sort of like naturalistic conversations and things like that. Yeah, there aren't like big set pieces really, like there's no massive shootouts like there was in Django or Inglourious Bastards or even really Hateful Eight. So it is a bit of a quieter, softer film. So and Jackie Brown I think is a brilliant film and one of his best. So yeah, it's worth seeing. It's worth seeing, especially like a Tarantino film is a big event for lovers of independent cinema. Although can Tarantino be classified as independent anymore now that he's got like Hollywood A-listers, Brad Pitt, Margot Robbie and Leonardo DiCaprio in his films. But yeah, it's worth seeing because at least it's an event and it's something that, it's nice that everyone's talking about independent cinema for like 1 month a year before we go back to talking about The Joker or Aquaman or something.
Yeah, as I think I said as we were walking home from the cinema, in some ways it's odd that the big sort of independent film is coming out at this point in summer when normally I'd expect this to come out in like December, January for the hey, notice me Oscar window. Yeah,
I mean, especially as I think also you said that like Hollywood and the Oscars love films about Hollywood, so maybe this is one of Tarantino's better chances to get nominated for Oscars.
But on the other hand, it is quite a bright, sunny film, even if it does have a few dark moments. But yeah, I guess maybe he just felt it was more a summer movie, I don't know.
Yeah, one of those things.
I've read a bit where one of the producers or director or something behind Dark Phoenix was saying that one of the things they felt that went wrong with that release was that it was made as a sort of a dark autumn-winter film and it ended up coming out in the middle of the summer movie season. I mean, that's not what went wrong with Dark Phoenix.
No.
Dark Phoenix was terrible, that was the problem. But it's interesting, I guess, that they think about that. So I don't know whether that also applies to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and that's why we're seeing it now.
I'm sure they think about that sort of thing, but I don't know. I think it's just one of those things that, like, a well-timed release isn't going to save a bad film, unless you get incredibly lucky and, like, your film comes out alongside films that are even bigger turkeys, so yours looks good by comparison. Well, well-timed release is sort of the cherry on top of the cake. And there's exceptions to every rule. Like, generally it's regarded, I think, the worst time to release a film for the Oscars is February. It's just after the Oscars have happened. It's the longest possible time for the next Oscars, so there's plenty of time for all the critics and everyone to forget your film. Silence of the Lambs, though, released in February, swept the board at the Oscars. So there's exceptions to every rule. Rare exceptions.
Exceptions that happened in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, yeah, cool.
Wow, that's the first one that comes to mind at the top of my head. I think it's partly because Silence of the Lamb is the famous exception for had the worst possible Oscar release scheduled to then go on and win those Oscars. But we'll see. Maybe this will be Tarantino's year. Well, or 2020 will be Tarantino's year. Leonardo DiCaprio is very good in this film, actually, to be fair. I could see him at least getting a nomination. To be fair, he got an Oscar nomination for his role in Django as well.
But he's got his Oscar now, hasn't he? That was the big deal about The Revenant.
Yes, he got his Oscar after his 4 or so nominations.
If he now gets an Oscar for this, where he's just swanned around in nice clothes, having beaten himself body and soul for his Oscar in The Revenant, it'll almost be sort of darkly funny.
Yeah, that will actually be quite funny.
Okay, and first up on this fortnight's X-Men X-Travaganza, we will be talking about the third season of Legion, the TV show adapted from a range of comics across Marvel history, featuring the character David Haller, who is famously Professor Xavier's mentally ill son, who also unfortunately has reality-shifting telepathic powers, and it turns out that that is a bad combination. And this is a sort of surreal premium telly take on this, sort of really pushing the envelope in terms of storytelling and so on, and using the fact that because David is superpowered and slightly unstable, basically anything can happen. This is show run by Noah Hawley and stars Dan Stevens as, well, he does finally call himself Legion in this season after steadfastly not really using the word in the first 2 years. And yep, this is a show that's had some pretty good write-ups from us over the first 2 years. I think I at least slightly preferred the first season to the second, but it's still been a highlight of the last 2 TV years. And now we've had this, the third and final season. We have seen the whole thing. I at least I'm going to try and not spoil the ending yet, but I imagine I will spoil the ending before the review is out. I'll let you know when I'm planning on doing that. With that in mind, Alistair, what did you think of this conclusion?
So I rated this show as my second series. I rated as my favourite show of 2018, and the first series I think I rated as my favourite show of 2017. I certainly wasn't disappointed by the third series. With that in mind, that high bar, it did live up to what I was expecting, in that it was still very, very odd, very off the wall, really kind of, as you say, push the envelope of storytelling, as they used lots of interesting and slightly odd storytelling techniques to dig into this thing of what is it like to be, well, both mentally ill and also to have like colossal sort of reality warping psychic powers. Yeah, it was very good. It was a good series. It's quite slow. I kind of felt that the second series maybe had a bit more pace to it, and the second series had a sort of race against time structure to it, and that they had to find the main plot was trying to find Farouk's body before his sort of dispossessed ghost did. But yeah, this series was kind of different in that it wasn't quite as fast paced, but that said, like, it moved quite slowly, but it really had this sense of building to a big conclusion. I mean, we knew it was the final series. Throughout it, there was a whole sense of escalating tension. There's a big sort of revelation at the end of Series 2, which, so I guess, yeah, probably some spoilers for Series 2 coming. It sort of revealed that the degree to which David's been traumatized by all the events that have happened has meant that he's acting at least in a morally dubious way. And there's a question over, is he actually a sympathetic hero or more of a villain? Has he gone too far? And they continue that thread into this series really well and build the moral ambiguity of the character more. And it does have this great sort of sense throughout of like a escalation, sort of slow rising tension to the sort of final confrontation, which we can discuss maybe later on. But yeah, so I enjoyed that, definitely.
Yeah, I was impressed how far they went with the David, is he actually bad stuff. Like, when they had him really break through this am I actually a villain moment at the end, I sort of half expected them to walk it back a bit, but for the most part of this season, he is, if not the villain, then somewhat, yeah, I mean, he's definitely not, I don't know, I'm just trying to work out if this is a good time to deploy the dreaded word anti-hero, but I'm not sure he's even that entirely, because generally with anti-heroes, you know, you might disapprove of their methods, but you can see their point, whereas David is using both pretty sketchy methods and I'm not sure what he's doing is a good idea. So, he's borderline villain at this point.
I would definitely not say he's an anti-hero. I think you're right. But I think, there's a sense you're supposed to question, is he a villain? And I suppose in reality, the show is trying to go beyond the simple binary morality of there's only good guys and bad guys, in that David, he's a person who's been through like a lot of trauma. And, you know, some of it is completely not his fault. It's stuff that happened to him when he was an infant, obviously. But also he's made, despite the fact he's got mental health problems and lots of issues, he's made decisions of his own free will. He's partly informed by his trauma, but partly he did things that he didn't have to do. He's a complex human being. I think the show does a really good job of painting people with mental health problems as, yes, people who've had terrible things happen to them, but also they're not just hapless victims kind of crushed by the world. Just because you have mental health problems doesn't mean you don't have a sense of agency, control of yourself. You're still a human being who can make moral decisions, and some of David's decisions are dubious. And also he's incredibly powerful. Unlike, because he's a mutant with enormous psychic powers, he does have the ability to hurt people around him a lot. He treats people badly, he lashes out at them, he behaves selfishly. And the show is very good, I think, exploring the complexities of, like, not all of this is David's fault, but some of it is, and it's not entirely clear cut what is and is not his fault. It's all about diving into that complexity, which that's something I really liked about it.
Yeah, I think it does a good job with that. I think it possibly loses that thread a bit towards the end. I would not be surprised to discover that they would have liked a fourth season to really stretch out the stuff that's in the last couple of episodes. But it's not a bad ending. I can certainly believe that this was always their planned ending.
I did like the ending. Yeah, we can talk about it.
We will throw up a spoiler barrier and talk more about the ending. But yeah, the bulk of the season sticks to David as a reasonably flat-out villain, and also brings in, to complicate things further, some evil, malevolent forces. Not even, kind of malevolent, but mostly the sort of naturally dangerous forces of nature. Basically, David is screwing around with time travel. I think it's not that big a spoiler, considering it's in the first few minutes, to say that there's some time travel in season 3. Quite a lot of it, in fact. David is dicking around with time travel because his current approach to everything he's done wrong and all the mistakes he's made is that he's going to try and undo them with time travel. And as a result, he ends up causing
more problems.
The usual sort of, oh dear, now reality is disintegrating, which this show does, as you might expect, take the opportunity to have some fun with. The Time Eater creatures, the demons it brings in, are properly creepy. There's one or two episodes especially focused on them and the threat they pose, which are very, very nicely done and are very sort of skin-crawly at times.
Yeah, the show really handles the time demons brilliantly, using it's the sort of slightly abstract way that the whole thing is kind of put together, in that you think that so how are we going to visually portray a sort of a being from outside time that consumes time and is kind of formless but also sinister and dangerous and is going to try to kill some of our main characters. And obviously it's hard, and they kind of do it in a weird way. There's a sort of shadows with glowy eyes that they don't visibly move, but they kind of disappear one place and appear in another with a sort of sinister ticking sound like a clock. It's very, very odd, but done in a quite dark way, and I think it's a brilliant way to bring to life something that is almost impossible to visually depict, a creature from outside time.
Yeah, there's a lot of fun dicking around with TV as a medium, he says, to use the wankiest possible term, to deploy the Time Eaters. There's a lot of time glitching and running, sort of skipping back and then glitching back forward. There's a couple of sequences where characters are stuck in this sort of faded looking slideshow, struggling to move frame by frame. I did not get this. I am not this studiously meta. I had this pointed out to me by an online review where it just cuts out and shows about 30 seconds of an episode of The Shield, which I'm told is the show that would have been on the same network in the US 20 years ago or something. So, cool.
Oh, that's what that was.
Yeah. That's what that random snippet of Cop show in the middle of Legion was. Yes, it was the network itself falling prey to the Time Eaters.
That's wow. Okay,
yeah.
I'm glad I found that out, yeah.
Yeah, that's the level of clever we're on. Although, I quite liked in this season that although it was definitely operating in this sort of elevated storytelling way, messing around with the form and bringing in surreal stuff, and there's musical numbers. The longer Legion goes on, the more they seem to really get into their musical numbers.
That's been a kind of feature from the beginning, but they had little dance bits in the first few episodes, didn't they? When he was in the mental hospital.
Yeah, it used to be dancing, and now it's full-on lip-sync music videos. I think it seems to be very different. And a rap battle between Jermaine Clements from Flight of the Conchords and Jason Mantzoukas from Brooklyn Nine-Nine and Good Place, which was great.
Yeah, the rap battle was phenomenal. Yeah, and I'm glad they got Jermaine Clements back to do his part, because the fact that he's in it is just adds to the kind of weirdness of the whole thing. And actually, what I found really moving is this is a discussion of the final episode, but it's not really spoilery. But if you do want to know absolutely nothing about the final episode, you might want to skip ahead now. But yeah, in the final episode, they have a sequence that's played over David and his mother singing "Mother" by Pink Floyd, track from The Wall. And for a very long time, The Wall was my absolute favourite album of all time. And the music of Pink Floyd, and The Wall especially, is the perfect soundtrack for Legion. It's all about isolation, madness, mental health, and bringing these things to life through visual representations and manifesting trauma in kind of visual and audio forms through both the performances Pink Floyd did of The Wall and the various film adaptations and live stagings and things like that. I could talk about The Wall all day, but I'm glad that they saved using The Wall for the final episode, because it's the perfect soundtrack. Yeah, it's an album that's all about loss of identity, disintegration, madness.
Isn't Sid named after one of the Pink Floyd people?
Yes. Sid Barrett was one of the original founding members of Pink Floyd, he's only on the first album. He was the original singer. He became an acid casualty. He took too much acid and had a complete mental breakdown, and was replaced by David Gilmour for the classic Floyd lineup. The album Wish You Were Here, the later Floyd album, which is one of their best, Wish You Were Here, is all about that. Anyway, that's my Floyd sidebar, but the young 20-something in me who used to think Roger Waters was a god above all other gods was very, very pleased to see them bringing in the sort of symbology of the wall into Legion because it just worked so well.
Well, yeah, as I say, I think from the shout-out in Sid's name, that's obviously something the creator likes.
Yeah.
I thought by the time we reached the final episode, we dissolved full on into. I mean, most of the final episode is kind of abstract mindscape sequences, and I think that bit works well. I don't know that song that well. True confession of my lack of Pink Floyd knowledge, but yeah, I liked the lyrics of that song, if only because they were fairly, I don't know, spiky. It didn't seem like they were just going, the love between a mother and a child. It seemed very sort of, oh dear, is this in a very sort of Legion-y way? Oh dear, is this on some level still bad?
Yeah, it's absolutely perfect because the Pink Floyd don't do nice songs about love and things like that. Everything's about trauma and terror and the pointlessness of existence and things like that. At least not later stages, Roger Waters era Floyd.
But yeah, I think even though it's doing a lot of very, very clever and very sort of surreal messing with the medium stuff, in some ways I like the fact that it was actually quite simple in its way. Like, I could tell you reasonably clearly what's going on in most of the episodes. That one where Sid disappears into Fairyland was a bit odd, but for the most part I could pretty much tell you reasonably confidently what happened and how it relates to the overall plot, whereas at times during season 2 it's possible I might not have been able to.
Yeah.
If only because in season 2 they sort of reverse engineered a lot of the motivations. Like, they didn't tell you a lot of what was going on for the last couple of episodes, and the first 6 or 7 episodes were just people turning up and doing things for reasons they would reveal to you later. Whereas in season 3, at least, you were always vaguely aware of what was happening and why they're doing things and how it moves the plot forward.
Yeah.
Which I think made this a smoother viewing experience for me. I think it maybe tipped just a few inches too far over the willful obtuseness line for me in season 2. Whereas season 3, I think, was a perfect balance of this is a plot that a human being can follow, but it's still being told really weirdly.
Yeah, I think you're completely right with that. Like, you could, if you wrote down the plot of this series of Legion, it wouldn't take you that long to explain it because the plot is not particularly sophisticated. But but that's very much not the point in Legion. The point is how it's told in the sort of the weird abstract sideways bits, and the fact that like a plot point will evolve slowly but in a very strange way, and also the fact that there's so many layers of characterization and things like that built over it. And I kind of love all the little interesting asides. I quite liked the 6th episode, the one that takes place sort of entirely in the astral plane, when you kind of Sid lives her whole life being raised by the Jermaine Clement character, and the one that has the rap battle in it.
Yeah, that was fun. I think they've had one sort of slightly surreal detour episode in basically every season.
Yeah.
And that was clearly this season's surreal detour, and it was nicely done. I quite enjoyed it as a little sort of vaguely Gaiman-esque fairy story.
Yeah.
Well, it felt like some of the detour issues he does in Sandman, but it was still very much a Legion type thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a fun season to watch. I'm pretty sure it'll probably be somewhere in my top 5 TV shows at the end of the year. As I said, and as I'll probably get to in a minute when we talk about the actual ending, I think maybe they'd have liked a 4th season, but I'm kind of also am not that bothered by the fact that it's finished now and they successfully finished it on a decent high.
Yeah, definitely. And there's so much to love about this show. And I really like the sort of 60s aesthetic that runs throughout it. It's never really said that it's set in the 1960s, but everything looks very 60s. And when they go try and travel back to David's childhood, everything kind of looks a bit 1940s. His father, Professor Xavier, he said he's just fought in a war, and it's never made clear, is it the Second World War? What was it? I like the fact ambiguity. Maybe it is set in the 40s and 60s, or maybe it's set in a future time period that apes the style of the 1940s, then follows it up with aping the style of the 1960s 20 years on. I mean, there's so much, right now, 90s fashion and design is really popular, but 90s fashion is so... And we're reviving that, but 90s fashion is a lot of 60s revivalism anyway, and so maybe everything just continues forever.
Oh, I liked Harry Lloyd as Professor X. He either has a very similar accent just naturally to McAvoy doing Professor X, or he's doing a really spot-on impersonation.
Yeah, I think he really nailed that performance. And I kind of liked also how subtle they were, that they don't bash you over the head with look, it's Charles Xavier, don't you get it now? This is X-Men continuity, this is how it fits in. It's kind of, there's little bits you see him building his early Cerebro in the basement, and I think only once I heard him referred to as Xavier, but he's always referred to as Charles a lot.
I think the only time they mentioned Xavier that I noticed was when the time traveller Switch addresses his wife as Gabrielle Xavier.
Yeah, that's mentioned.
I don't think he's ever referred to as Xavier or Charles Xavier.
Yeah, that's the only time I can remember as well. Yeah, so I liked how they were kind of subtle about it. Like you don't. To be fair, you could watch this show and be blissfully unaware that it's an X-Men show, and it doesn't distract from the enjoyment. Or you can just really dig into the lore, and this is kind of how it links up. And
Well, yeah, I was half expecting a bit at the end where Xavier says to his wife, "That's it, no more travelling. Just got one last trip to make. I've heard there's a guy who does magnets."
Oh yeah,
or some shit, but they didn't even do that.
But he did have a bit when he says like, "I want to stop fighting and become a teacher," which I
Yeah.
think is, that's enough of a nod. Yeah, the other and also the supporting cast of bizarre other mutants, like we discussed. Sid, she's obviously cool with her body swapping power, and the Carey twins.
I don't feel like we give them enough love. They're always really, really good.
Yeah.
I think Bill Irwin and Amber Midthunder as Carey and Kerry,
Yeah.
who are both just really nice people in a cast of otherwise sort of slightly tormented, angsty folk. Kerry and Kerry are always a very sort of nice, likeable, grounding presence. There's a scene in this series where the male one, Kerry, escapes from a prison cell by sort of following his captor around like a mime.
Oh, that's brilliant. Yeah.
Which is amazing. It just came out of nowhere, as a lot of things do on Legion, and he just did that for a few minutes and then escaped. So I was like, cool, that was great.
That was really good. I forgot about that. Yeah, they are excellent characters, and yeah, they had a nice resolution to their arc at the end. But yeah, just a nice little nod to their characters, and the time traveling woman was interesting. Yeah, again, every character gets like an arc, even if it's like a relatively simple arc. Every character throughout the show learns something and grows, and that learning and growth is fit into the main plot and things like that. It is just very competently written, a show, and fits together really well, despite the fact it's full of like bizarre tangents shooting off in like every direction, and everything just kind of like join up at the end.
Yeah, despite anything I might say about the ending possibly feeling slightly rushed, they did bring it all together. The Aubrey Plaza character got a nice send-off, actually.
Yeah, also she's very good. Yeah.
Yeah, she's great in this show. Yeah, last season I had a slight rumble of the why she's still in it, but no, her storyline in the third season was really good.
Yeah, and it's absolutely traumatic episode when I don't know. Is this too much to spoil? It's
Well, I mean, we've been dipping into it for a while, so yeah, shall we throw down the from now on we're just going to spoil it barrier?
Yeah, I think you're right. So yeah, if you don't want the rest of the show spoiled or spoilers, or you haven't seen it, timestamps are in the description.
I will attempt to put a timestamp in for this spoiler section, but if nothing else, there'll be a timestamp for when you can cut forward to the
X-Men
comics section.
There's an episode when the Time Demons are screwing with time, and the Audrey Plaza character called Lenny, her girlfriend is pregnant, and because of the way the Time Demons are messing up time, the baby is sort of born and lives a full human lifespan of like 70, 80 years in about 5 minutes, which obviously is traumatic to go through when you've just obviously hold your newborn baby in your arms, and then a few minutes later they're sort of 70 and quietly passing away in their sleep, having led what I guess is a good full life, but you just didn't get to experience it or see it because it happened in 5 minutes. And that is heartbreaking.
Well, yeah, when I first saw that, I genuinely assumed they were going to walk it back, or at least have the Aubrey Plaza character wake up and her girlfriend still be pregnant, because I was like, okay, that's harrowing. But no, they actually did that. Funnily enough, Lenny had a bit of a breakdown after that.
And then David sort of annihilates her the way he just casually annihilates people.
Yeah, and another banner moment for David Haller. Yeah, at that point he was seeming like a bit of a dick.
Yeah, well, because with the first half of this third series, he's kind of set himself up as a sort of cult leader. That you're never really sure how much, like most things in Leave, and you're never really sure how much of it is real or just, I don't know, psychic abstraction or David's mental health sort of problems. And also that's kind of riffing on the 60s style that he set himself up with this kind of, almost like, linking it back to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Charles Manson-esque kind of free love cult figure, but with a real dark side to him. And they're kind of, his cult followers are sort of addicted to the kind of psychic rush he gives out. But then again, he loses his temper and has a dark turn and then kind of clicks his fingers and blinks them all out of existence because that's within his power.
Yeah, there's some particularly grim David shit towards the end. Obviously, there's, I think, the fifth, sixth episode when he goes on board the airship of the good guy team, the closest thing we have to X-Men in this show. Yeah. The sort of the people who used to be his allies, and just kind of smashes through them and I think kills at least a couple of them.
Yeah.
He kills the guy who used to be a sort of spook and is now one of their allies.
Yeah.
Just flushes him out into space. Fairly bleak offhand moment.
That guy really looks like Chris Morris. The whole time he's on screen, it's like, that man really looks like Chris Morris. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, and then we get to the actual ending. It'll be good to roll on to the actual ending.
Yep, go for it.
And the actual ending entails basically David successfully goes back in time and eventually stops the inciting instance of his whole life from happening, stops himself as a baby from being possessed by Farouk, the evil Shadow King, thus undoing basically everything that's happened and blinking most of the show and the cast out of existence. In a move that's sort of... It's a weird emotional vibe around it, and it's like everyone is aware that what they're basically doing is David is basically taking them all out of existence, and his four friends end up sort of helping him, having sort of, I guess, concluded that this is probably the best possible outcome, even though they're basically fighting for their own lack of existence, which is kind of depressing.
And also wonderfully meta.
It's a weird sort of happy, the baby gets to have a nice life ending, but is also quite nihilistically depressing, because it basically means all the characters we've followed for 3 years who aren't already dead will now just vanish. Yeah. And yeah, it's strange.
Yeah, but I think it's a good resolution. It's certainly very conclusive. I like the fact it has a conclusive wrap up, but also leaves you wondering, well, what happens next? I guess everyone gets to live their lives over again. Will the characters meet each other in some other combination? I quite like the fact this is conclusive ending, because the whole third series is this sense of building to like a final confrontation, and when at the end of the second last episode, when it's David and Xavier ganging up to fight Farouk from the future, which is a great twist. You kind of think, well, okay, so the last episode is going to be this epic psychic battle between these four incredibly powerful sort of psychic mutants, but then actually the resolution is not to fight and to kill, but the resolution is to learn to coexist, to learn to stop fighting, which I guess is what brings the end of the show, this idea that we have to learn to stop fighting, and once we learn to stop fighting, the pain can end. And also, that truly what's underneath the trauma that Farouk inflicts on David is actually the deeper trauma that his parents abandoned him, and that has to be addressed. And the fact that they managed to tie that all up quite neatly, using their kind of weird abstract ways and lots of scenes in the astral plane with odd things going on. Yeah, that I thought it came together well, because it's quite an ambitious ending to pull off without it seeing like cheap or a bait and switch or something like that. But it was good. It
was weird, if only because I said earlier about this being a surprisingly simple plot by Legion standards, and David had been kind of set up as a villain. The villain is trying to change the past. Normally he doesn't succeed. I'm honestly not sure if my mildly conflicted feelings about the ending are because it was bad, or just because I was sort of genuinely expected something a lot simpler than what I got, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it's probably quite a reasonable ending for this quite sort of strange, ambiguous show. I liked the fact that he had his final moment with Sid, but there was no real redemptive, it's okay, David moment. It was mostly just, okay, fine, please don't fuck it up. Yeah, you got your second chance. Please don't dick us all over again.
Yeah, exactly. It was and it wasn't a bearing of the hatchet, but it wasn't a kind of excoriation or anything like that. I thought it was very emotionally well balanced ending. There was no forgiveness. There was no sense that Sid had to forgive David for the horrible things he'd done to her. But still, David had to be reconciled with his father, and also had to some way reconcile him to the existence of Farouk, which I think kind of again links back to what the show's trying to say about mental illness, which is that there are lots of things that are not David's faults because of the trauma he's been through, and he does deserve apology and validation from his father who abandoned him, and he does deserve an acknowledgement from Farouk that what he did to him was terrible. But also at the same time, David has to take responsibility for how he's lived and the things he's done. He doesn't get a free pass from everyone, because he's still, despite what's happened to him, he's still got a sense of agency in his own person. And they kind of, again, they tied up a lot of complex stuff into a quite neat ending that didn't feel glib or like hammering over the head with a kind of, the point is love. Like, the point is love, not war. They could have had a really like kind of crappy, the point is love, not war, or like the point is you must forgive your abusers. And it was like, it's like, it's not like that. It's got something complex to say, but also without it also being like, I don't know. There's no like massive monologue at the end, which is like, this is the point.
Yeah, I expected him to not so much get what he wanted, but maybe in the end that's probably still the best possible ending, even if it is also what the villain sort of wants.
Yeah.
It's a weird setup, but I enjoyed watching it, and I enjoy being confused by it, so.
Yeah, it sustains the moral ambiguity that's sort of underpinned the show.
Well, yeah, and as you say, so the show is clearly perpetuating a very sort of nurture, not nature. These are things that happen to you as a result of childhood trauma approach to mental illness, whilst at the same time trying to have, the things that happen in the show actually matter and character actions have consequences, which is a bit of a balancing act, especially when you're also throwing in surreal shit and, of course, time travel.
Yeah, and time demons.
Yeah, all told, this was probably about as good a Legion Season 3 as I could hope for. I'm pretty happy with it.
Yeah, me too.
Hey, good stuff. Hopefully something else will come along to take up the baton of premium, pretentious Marvel TV for adults, because they've basically cancelled all of them at this point.
Yeah, well, we'll have to see what they do on Disney+.
Yeah. Well, to be continued next year. Okay. And meanwhile, over in the comics, the whole X-Men franchise is undergoing a bit of a massive relaunch, courtesy of writer Jonathan Hickman. And well, they're doing two separate miniseries which sort of intertwine and come together, published with one issue of one of them coming out every week. Helpfully, there's a diagram in the back of each issue to explain what order to read them in. So the two miniseries are House of X, with art by Pepe Larraz, and Powers of 10, although stylized as Powers of X, but it is Powers of 10, with art by R.B. Silver. And together they tell the story of the mutants led by Professor Xavier taking on more of a separatist agenda and acquiring the living island of Krakoa as their new homeland, and using its mysterious, strange flowers as their main export product, as apparently the flowers of Krakoa also double as wonder drugs. And meanwhile, the reasons why Xavier is suddenly doing this are also explained in a string of flashes back and forward to different things happening in both his past and various dystopian futures. It's going to be somewhat hard to talk about this without spoiling at least one major thing that happens in about the third issue, but we'll see how we go for a few minutes before we have to drop at least one middling spoiler bomb. So the last issue we've read, for what it's worth, is Powers of X issue 3, which was the fifth one released. Alistair, this is, I think, probably your first time following, if not ever, then in a while, following a comic or a superhero comic issue by issue as it comes out, isn't it? How was it for you?
Yes, this is the first time of reading X-Men comics. It's the first time we've done an issue by issue release since I think we did curse words or something for this podcast, or maybe when we did Old Guard.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it, and I got into it quite quickly, which I liked. I mean, the kind of plot that you just sort of briefly outlined is a sort of Legion level of kind of complexity and oddness. So the two go together quite well, and I did really appreciate sort of watching and reading X-Men at the same time. I really like Jonathan Hickman's writing. My main sort of takeaway from it is that as I was reading it, obviously this is a complex story that evolves in a sort of circuitous way. There was quite a few moments when I was kind of confused, and I had this nagging sensation: am I confused because the story is creating mysteries that I'm supposed to wonder what the resolutions are, which is good, or am I just confused because it's referencing things from past X-Men comics that I'm not aware of? I mean, at several points I stopped to Google things to kind of establish who things are, mainly stuff that hasn't been in an X-Men movie or in that 90s X-Men cartoon show, which is kind of where most of my X-Men knowledge come from. So, for example, like one of the main villains in Powers of 10 is Nimrod, who's not a character I was familiar with, so I had to go and read the Wikipedia page on Nimrod. But after reading it, I was basically like, right, that makes perfect sense, I can pick up the story. So I'd be curious to find out, Nick, to what degree you felt the story was like throwing out a lot of mysteries. Are you supposed to be confused in the same way that you are confused when you watch Legion, because Legion throws out weird stuff and some of it will be picked up later? Or was it generally just going over my head?
I think it was mostly confusing in an intentional way. Like it's really hard to do this without dropping the main spoiler. But yeah, I think a lot of what's happened and, okay, how is this supposed to work, is in some ways, or how does this fit in with anything that's happened before or happens in the future, is the main question of the series. Like, I think the concept of, like, say, Krakoa the Living Island, which is quite central to the present day part of the narrative, it's appeared before, but it's never been a habitat or a source of drugs before. So there's a lot of the stuff that's being dealt with aggressively is either new or it's different spins on it. Like, I've never read a comic with Nimrod in it. I was just aware he was one of the wide range of evil anti-mutant robots available to the X-Men canon. I've not read actually that many comics with Apocalypse in, but, you know, I know enough about Apocalypse to understand the bits where he appears. I mean, to be fair, the main Apocalypse appearances so far, he's been acting kind of out of character, based on what I know of him.
And also, he's very much a supporting part in this.
Yeah, the main plot revolves around Professor Xavier and Moira McTaggart, his girlfriend from the past, who is, it looks like, about to take on a much more central role in the whole X-Men canon, at least for the duration of this Hickman storyline. See, I think, to be honest, at this point, nearly halfway through the story, you're meant to mostly be intentionally confused. I mean, is there any particular point you were confused on in the actual plot?
I think I followed the plot quite well. It was more just like, for example, it's kind of hard to put. I should have actually written them down when I came across them, but there's various things like the living island, I guess, was one. That was something that I was definitely like, I'm not really sure if this is something that's appeared before or something that was supposed to, something whereabouts. Or there's little things like Professor X walks in this and has a sort of permanently wears a big kind of headset thing. I suppose that's things have been explained more recently. But the comic is good at illuminating these things. So they go through the history of the Trask family. But then I was a bit confused by that. But then obviously I just kind of Googled them quickly. I then realised that, Dr. Bolivar Trask is the Peter Dinklage character from Days of Future Past. I see it. Oh, in the comics, there's a whole kind of family of them where he's just one person in the film because they've simplified it. So I was able to work things out and follow the plot. Yeah, and I did really like how it sort of jumped around through time. It's quite a good conceit that Powers of 10 is set across 4 timelines, and they're quite clearly demarcated as x to the power 0 or 10 to the power 0, which is anything to the power 0 is 1, so that's year 1. Then it's x to the power 1, and anything to the power 1 is itself, so that's year 10. Then x to the power 2, x times x, or 100, and x to the power 3, x times x, or 1,000. So you've got the beginning, you've got year 1, year 10, year 100, year 1,000, which is quite neat kind of points, and as they jump off. And the way that House of X fits into this is that it's set in year 10 of the Powers of 10 storyline, I think.
Yeah, roughly. If you really want to know details, there is a gigantic fuck-off timeline in the back of several of the issues.
Yeah.
Which will enable you to do some hardcore counting. Broadly, it's what you said, yeah.
And the plot seems to revolve around, in year 1, Xavier finds out about this plan to form a sort of mutant separatist society. Year 10 is the story of this separatist society interwoven with a separate comic set in that universe. Year 100 is a war between mutants and Sentinels, set in the 100 years in the future where Nimrod is sort of leaving an army of Sentinels to wipe out mutants, at least mutants on Earth. And then year 1000 seems to be after this war, when some form of future beings are attempting to reconstruct mutant society based on the knowledge about mutants that Nimrod acquired during the war. That one's probably the most confusing.
Well, Year 1000's only appeared in about four or five pages. I don't think we're really meant to be hard into that side of a story yet.
But they talk a lot about Ascension, and there's also a Church of Ascension in the Year 100 storyline, and the Phalanx turn up, who is someone I remember from the cartoon.
I mean, let's just go spoilers now, because I'm just going to talk about everything that happens. So, yeah, okay. If you care about spoilers for House of X, Powers of 10, I'm going to spoil the Year 1000 storyline now, and then I'm going to spoil the main Moira McTaggart storyline in a minute. So, yeah, the Year 1000 storyline, they talk about they're trying to attract the Phalanx so they can ascend. They create a super intelligent world mind, specifically so the Phalanx will come to get it.
Yeah.
Is the plot, I think, based on the fact that I actually sat down and read all of his long, wordy data pages where he explains things.
Yeah, and they can ascend with them.
Yeah, we don't really know entirely exactly what they're doing yet, but as I say, it's only been about 5 pages in that timeline, so I assume we'll get there.
Yeah.
But yeah, the spite of it so far seems to be that they've done, Hickman's done a massive retcon with Moira McTaggart, who is Professor Xavier's his girlfriend, who's played a role in various X-Men comics through the years, and reveals she's actually a mutant, which she never was before House of X came out, and her power is reincarnation, and she's actually lived 9 lives before, going through to various dystopian futures mostly, and seeing all the worst ways that things can turn out. Going through this has made her decide to reveal all these possibilities to Xavier, who reads them out of her mind, and now that's why he's decided to take this more radical, let's just form a separatist nation approach, I think, is the basic plot so far.
Yeah, which is interesting because it's going back to a lot of the X-Men themes. Like a parallel we've talked about before, and many people have drawn out, is that X-Men came out during the Civil Rights era, and there's an element of Magneto is supposed to embody a sort of Malcolm X-esque mutant, what you would call mutant nationalism. The idea that mutants can never be free and safe in a human society. They require their own separate society to be free and safe, which is something, I mean, I'm hugely simplifying, but it's kind of something that Malcolm X believed, they're like in a completely separate society for black people. Again, huge simplification. And Martin Luther King believed more that black and white people could live together in harmony. And that's what Professor Xavier, espounds, the idea that mutants and humans can live together. Now, obviously, there's like layers of comic book melodrama kind of piled on top of that, in that Magneto sometimes believes that it's necessary for his mutant society to annihilate the human society to be completely safe, which is like explored, say, in X2, as that sort of got into as well. That's just necessary to tell awesome superhero sci-fi plot lines. But it's kind of what I find interesting about this comic is it's kind of Xavier really turning against the kind of core of his belief that humans and mutants can peacefully coexist, and coming around to a Magneto-esque mutant separatism or mutant nationalism, the idea that they need their own nation where they can live together separately to be safe. That's a substantial departure for Professor X.
Yeah, the main question sort of thrown up between the two eras, the first two sort of most recognisable eras, is, to be honest, Professor X seems a bit weird in the House of X era, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, Professor X in the X to the Power Zero era or whatever, the Year One era, is roughly how you remember him. He's in a wheelchair, he's wearing a suit, he's a vaguely kindly teacher type.
Yeah.
And in House of X, he's walking, he's wearing this gigantic helmet all the time, and he's, to be honest, a bit creepy.
Are we supposed to know where the walking in the helmet come from?
I think he was walking in some other story I haven't read. I don't know. I don't think the helmet's been explained. I don't think his general creepy demeanour has been particularly explained.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, and also the fact that he's kind of had this huge... Well, it does explain why he's had this huge change of opinion, which is well done, which is that Moira's lived 9 lives in various different ways, trying to find a way to resolve the question of how do mutants and humans live together, or how does the greater sort of species continue. And she's tried everything from wiping out all of mutants to wiping out all of humans to separatism to going full into Xavier's can't we all just hug each other and can't we all just hug it out? And she's been through it all, and she's found there's only one way to do it. And Xavier can obviously see all of that in her mind. And then it's kind of shown to him how even when they go full in on his vision, it's ultimately doomed to fail. So he has to do something else, which partly involves reconciling himself in some ways to how Magneto sees the world.
It's also quite weird because it's implied, I think, this is quite early in his career when he first meets Moira and she puts this stuff in his head. So he knew this the whole time. This, like, it would make... I mean, this is
where it gets confusing.
This is where it gets confusing. This is where it's one of these things that presumably has to be explained, because it would make a lot more sense if his encounter with Moira happened, like, before he started the House of X project. But it's implied it happened quite a long time ago.
Yeah.
I mean, on the one level, this is how it has to happen, because that has to be his first meeting with Moira. And obviously, if continuity just happened as it was until House of X, he's already met Moira. But, on the other hand, what the fuck is going on?
Yeah.
So, yeah, and obviously he, and also it's implied Magneto, because there's a scene where he and Moira go to Magneto and share the contents of Moira's mind with him. So, yeah, I mean, all I'm literally doing is stating the plot at this point. But it's interesting, and it's such an obvious, glaring, weird point that it's basically, it must be addressed at some stage. I mean, probably in the obvious way wherein they somehow repress their Moira X knowledge until it's needed or it becomes relevant, or, I don't know, Krakoa absorbs it from them and then spits it back out at them or something. I would not be entirely surprised to discover something like that happens in Powers of X number 5 or something.
Yeah, and we've only had 2 House of X comics, so it's kind of hard to tell where that's going when you've only read 2 issues, but it's only intriguing.
Well, yeah, House of X seems to be mostly the stuff that's moving the main present-day narrative forward, whereas Powers of X is largely a lot of the future-y stuff.
The majority of the Powers of 10 storyline actually takes place in the year 100. It's mainly about the war, at least from my opinion. There's been obviously bits in the other storylines, but the majority of the year 10 stuff takes place in House of X. But this story of the war does seem to be the main thing, that like there is a degree to which also I guess is interesting, that you know that Xavier's vision for mutant separatism must fail ultimately because mutants are thrown into a war against Sentinels, and the Sentinels
except they're not, because that's more. It was revealed at the end of the most recent issue of Powers of X 10.
Yeah.
Damn it, that's Moira's ninth life.
Yeah, so they're trying
that isn't what's happening in our timeline.
Yes, no, that is actually correct. Yes, yes, no, of course, yeah, no, you're 100% right there. So I guess it's showing that one way it can fail is to collapse into war, and what they're trying to do in year 10 is avoid the progression to year 100 by going in a different direction. It is complicated.
It is.
I like it. That's a good thing. I like it. It's like Legion. It's like, I like being thrown at stuff and go, what? Like, wait a minute. And I kind of like the idea of like a story is kind of like being blindfolded and then have a bucket of marbles chucked at you and you've got to scramble around in the dark and and put the marbles into some kind of formation, because like I prefer that rather than being like spoon-fed like I'm a child. I don't need to be spoon-fed like stories in like a certain sequence.
Yeah, and I like the way it's sort of building forward. It's quite enjoyable. I mean, I haven't read a superhero comic on release day as it comes out every day, every week or every month or whatever myself for quite a while. But yeah, it's just fun because it's good and because it feels like he knows what he's doing and is going somewhere. You know, I mean, we're reviewing something that's 5/12 through its story. If it gets to part 12 and we discover he didn't know where he was going and it's all a disaster, then we may come back to this and it may be a less complimentary review. But at this point, it feels like he knows where he's going. He's got timelines. It's very confident storytelling, I think, is what's one of the things that's good about it. Yeah. At this point, I believe that he has an answer to all these questions I'm asking.
Yeah, I think we've used this before when we've kind of reviewed TV shows, when we've only done like the first 3 or so episodes of like a 12-arc TV show. So like they've thrown out a lot of stuff, and a lot of the stuff they've thrown out is interesting and good, and I'm kind kind of like going, ooh, look at this stuff, which is great. And then obviously the real skill is kind of pulling it all together into like a complete functioning thing. But certainly at this stage, I'm like, the stuff that's thrown out is good.
Yeah, I mean, once this is finished, there's going to be an X-Men issue 1 written by Hickman, and which will presumably feature something more resembling a straightforward X-Men comic. I don't really know. I mean, I'm hoping that a lot of this timeline stuff will be sensibly resolved by the end of House of X, but who can tell?
Yeah.
I like the idea of House of X / Powers of 10 being this sort of self-contained novel that, you know, throws out all these parts and then pulls them together. I think that would make it quite an interesting, possibly definitive and lasting work, but we'll have to wait and see where it goes.
Yeah, and I like the fact there's a chart to explain the order and a chart to explain all the timelines and things like that, yeah.
The timeline in the most recent issue is the extended version of a previous timeline to cover the ninth life. And also, in one of these things that you first think, oh, is it an error? And then again, because Hickman knows what he's doing, which is one of the things that's comforting about it, it's clearly deliberate. Moira X's 6 for life is very conspicuously missing from all the timelines and all the stories.
Yeah.
It's just blank. Something happened there.
Something to be filled in later. So that's a well-spotted little hidden thing. I mean, I enjoy the War in the Future stuff as well, just on the fact that I love, like, some great sci-fi that involves, like, you know, people fighting, like, giant killer robots. It's kind of, you know, and it is kind of, like, done in a sort of, there's a real sense of drama and tension and, like, this is the end of the world and there's a struggle for the survival of non-cybernetic life, not humans and mutants. The Sentinels seem to completely dominate human society and are now wiping out. And it's almost like enslave them. And if you want the face of the future to not be metal, then then we have to fight for it. And there's lots of great tension there, and it tells quite a good story. So yeah, for the love of kind of some pulpy, actiony sci-fi, but with some heart behind it, I do really enjoy that Year 100 storyline.
Yeah, as we had the last 2 issues of Powers of X have been fairly hard on the Year 100 stuff, and I was just getting to this is quite fun sort of dystopian fighty sci-fi, but how does it relate to the plot? Where's it all going? And then there was the big twist at the end where Moira appears and we realise we're actually in her ninth life, and it's all going back into Xavier's mind to presumably somehow influence the present day plot. And it was just galaxy plane, yes, okay, fine, I'm back on it now.
Yeah, well, they needed to find out when Nimrod was built, because they're kind of doing Terminator 2 in essence, which is now they know when Nimrod is built. In the 10th timeline, they're going to destroy Nimrod before he comes online.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing whether in the next issue of Powers of X, because I think we're now getting 2 straight issues of House, so whether in the next issue of Powers of X we'll now come back to X to the power 2 and it'll be somehow worse.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I can't imagine that's the end of that, because they're not just going to set up a conceit of 4 concurrent storylines just to stop one of them in the 4th or 3rd comic. But I guess this is all speculation. But
it's fun. It's fun. It's why I like this comic. There's been a lot of fun speculation on Twitter and general fun conversations.
Yeah, no, I really like it as well. And I really like kind of ambitious storytelling, like I say, like Legion and things like that. I liked Dark as well. It is kind of maybe because it's got time travel or at least multiple concurrent stories unfolding in different timelines. It reminds me of Dark, how you see an event in one timeline and then it's sort of mirrored in the other, or you see how that event's like effects play out in the long term, or how they are sort of juxtaposed. So as a lover of from time travel stories, from Dark to Primer to this, and to Legion and stuff, it is good.
Yeah, I was reading a review of it on a comics website that basically said this is really good, but it's sort of good as a sort of sci-fi, in a sort of sci-fi novel way. Whereas I'm still not sure it's a great X-Men comic, and I sort of read that and thought, well, at least Alistair will probably like it then.
Yeah. Also, they're doing something new with the medium. They shouldn't have to do the same stories over and over. It's good. I mean, like, he's got these 12 issues. Maybe he'll do a more straightforward X-Men comic after this.
I mean, dystopian futures are pretty classic X-Men comic fodder, from Days of Future Past to Age of Apocalypse. They're all over the place. So it's not as if he's, fucking breaking the system with a gigantic spanner. It's just I think this sort of slow, modular storytelling is quite novelistic by other comic standards, certainly by mainstream X-Men standards.
And it helped that I'd already read some Jonathan Hickman. For long-term fans may remember all the way back to, I think, MFV 3. When we did the recommendations, we reviewed the first volume of Manhattan Projects, which he wrote. And it helped that I'd read that, and I knew that, like, he has this style of throwing out lots of strange stuff, lots of ideas, like loads of, like, the first volume of Manhattan Projects throws out everything from, like, Nazi conspiracies to aliens to interdimensional travel to secret, like, ancient cults, and it's like all just like bang, 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 like, oh yeah, and human uploading into computers and all sorts of stuff, and it just comes to you so quickly that I kind of knew what to expect. That like, right, I'm going to get a lot of stuff thrown at me. Some of it will make sense when it needs to. The rest of it, just kind of enjoy the ride. So that helped.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is not a controversial opinion in current comics discourse, but yeah, so far, House of X, Powers of 10. Yeah.
Nice,
Yeah, good. Relatable
content. That's all we have time for this episode. If you've enjoyed this episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, then please subscribe in your podcatcher of choice so that you don't miss an episode. You can also visit our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can find other episodes of the podcast, bonus audio clips, and short written pieces by Nick and myself.
And why not also follow us on social media at MFV Podcast on Twitter, and also our Facebook page. Just search for Moderate Fantasy Violence, where we occasionally post about the podcast or retweet our pop cultural hot takes from our personal accounts. And speaking of which, my personal account is at NickMB, where I post about my comics and my opinion of other TV and comics. And you can also find out more about my own comics and general writing at nickbryan.com. Or if you're in the London area, why not come to Hackney Comic and Zine Fair on Sunday the 8th of September in... Probably look up exactly where it is before attempting to promote it. That would have been a good idea, wouldn't it?
It's in the London Fields Brewery.
Yes, folks, that is the sound you're hearing is Alistair knowing more about my event than I do. Yes, it is in the London Fields Brewery in Hackney near London Fields from 12 to 6 p.m. on Sunday the 8th. It's free entry, and I'm told there is a hefty minimum spend by the organiser. So if you don't like comics but do like beer, then feel free to come on down and have a pint of beer, and you will genuinely be helping our cause. But also, please come and buy my comics.
And I will also be there drinking the beer, so you can...
If you want to witness Alistair J.R. Ball, he will also be present, drinking the beer and maybe at least glancing at a couple of comics.
I've been Alistair Ball. You can follow me on Twitter at Alistair J.R. Ball, and you can find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com. Join us next time when we will be reviewing It Chapter 2. We reviewed It Chapter 1 when it came out a few years ago, and we gave it generally a thumbs up, but will Chapter 2 live up to the promises set up by Chapter 1? Who knows? Tune in next time to find out. But until then, thanks for listening. Goodbye.
Bye.
Yeah, the majority of Powers of 10 or Powers of X.
I fucked up.
Yeah, it's all right. I think we've both done it at least once at this point. It's quite a good conceit that the Powers of X. Sorry,